Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our friend, Daniel Yates. All right. There you go. Please turn it on. Yeah. How's it going, Dan?
Double mic here?
We have video and we have the AP here.
Got it.
Thank you for coming out, Dan.
Good to be here.
Yeah, actually...
I'm not sure I've ever been cheered on stage before, so this is...
Stunning ovation.
I'm already this is a big win for me.
So thank you for coming out. Actually, I had saw you at a Washington Tech Titans party, and I was like, man, I was going to approach you, but you had like left. Like I was talking, I turned around, you were gone. So I was like, man,
sounds like me.
But I'm glad that I now have you here. So thank you for coming out. So we always like to start, all of our interviews with you, right? So let's go way back. Where were you born? Where were you raised? What did your parents do? And then perhaps talk about your first entrepreneur experience, if you had one. It's fine if you didn't, but let's go start with you.
So I was born in New Jersey. Before I was 1, we moved to Dallas, and then when I was 7, we moved to San Diego. So I think of my childhood as mostly in San Diego. My dad worked in the defense industry. He had been career Air Force for 26 years, but retired just as I was born. He was quite old when I was born.
Yeah.
So I knew him as a man who was passionate about the military and the Air Force, but who worked at General Dynamics. And my mom was a Hebrew school teacher. And I grew up in San Diego, going to public schools, and not surfing, inexplicably. And so that's childhood, and then first entrepreneur experience. I'd say I didn't really have, so I've got a couple of funny stories. So the first job I had was hand delivering flyers for a real estate broker, going door to door at like 13 and getting paid like what seemed to me a ludicrous like $8 an hour when I added it up. So that was my first place I got paid to do something. I got fired from all of the jobs that I had in high school. I was a terrible employee. I was a host at a diner and would sit there and be spaced out instead of seating people. And then I worked at the Gap, and it's exactly the same thing happened. I got the manager at the Gap sat me down and was like, "You seem like a really bright young man, but I don't think this is the right job for you, Dan." It's like, thank God I turned out to be a good entrepreneur, because I don't seem to be a very good employee. The most entrepreneurial thing I did in high school was I wrote a program. My dad had told me about this trick on the craps table where if you keep doubling down, your odds of not, if you're playing in the field, the odds of not winning 7 times in a row were really small. And so I thought, why am I not doing this? So I wrote a program, thank God I did this, to simulate, well, I also couldn't figure out how to get into a casino, so that was part of the problem. So I wrote a program to simulate this, and then the program revealed to me that, yes, while you only lost very rarely, when you lost so massively that you lost far more than your gains. And so I didn't go to the casino to gamble, but that was probably the most entrepreneurial thing I did before college. I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, that's it's good that you stopped on the not making being a casino person as a profession.
That's right. That's right.
I had no idea you were an Air Force brat.
So I wasn't really. That's why. So my dad had retired before I was born. So.
Oh, got it.
Yeah. So I mean,
but he's still your father, so you're technically a brat.
Yeah, but I never grew up in a base. And I'll take whatever slur you want to throw at me.
So the reason why I really want to say, because I'm actually an Air Force brat myself.
Okay.
So that's kind of I was up in Maine, Loring, and then Georgia, and then Montana. So places that are very populated with a lot of Asians, right? So,
right.
Anyways,
all 3 of them.
Exactly, all 3 of them. So I wanted to talk about. It's great that I've before the Opower story, you were. I know I'm kind of fast forwarding really quick here to the company called EduSoft, right? Which was sort of it sort of prepped you up for Opower, right? And so talk about that. Did you think like when you were CEO of this EduSoft company, ed tech? Tell us, like, did that give you a good perspective becoming the good co-founder CEO for Opower? So tell us that experience.
Yeah, I mean, so EduSoft was really my first serious work endeavor. So I graduated college in '99 with a degree in computer science. I convinced my roommate and good friend that we should both move out to the Bay Area and try and start something up. And we had just enough self-awareness to realize we knew nothing, that we didn't start a company immediately, but we joined another company that's not on my resume. I was there for 9 months to help get it started. It was my cousin's good friend was starting this online radio company, just frankly 10 years too early, so it didn't work out, but we helped, he raised the money and got things started, and we helped with recruiting and product management and got just a little bit of a window into what it looks like even to be at a startup, because we'd only ever worked before that at like Microsoft, so we didn't even have any mental model. But then we were impatient, and so we had said from the beginning we were going to stay less than a year. 9 months was the max. God forbid we stay an extra 3 months to make it a year. At 21, that seemed like impossible. So we left, and then we came up with this idea. We spent 3 months sitting in going back and forth between, we each were in shared apartments. So we didn't even, like, between his common room and my bedroom each other day, trying to figure out what we were going to do. And we came up with this educational software idea. And the first version of it was, the first idea we had was actually just terrible. But then we started to meet with teachers and talk to them about the issues they were having, and figured out why what we were thinking of was stupid, and evolving it. And then we came up with this business. And the things that I learned I learned a lot of things that we just never got right. Like, we stayed co-CEOs through the whole thing, which is a terrible idea.
Yeah.
But it didn't last long enough or get big enough to force us to change. We sold it. We were like 80 people and 10 million in revenue, and grew to 20 million the next year. After only 3 years, it was a successful company, but we sold it after 3 years. But we learned about product market fit, and we learned about that cycle, and realizing that what you think is great sort of falls when you bring it into the market, and you learn the real story, what the customer wants. I learned a lot about hiring and motivating people and organizational structure. And
so it was the world's first enterprise SaaS platform in education.
So what was the company? We were a testing platform for school districts. So when we first came in, the terrible idea we had was, why do you take a whole lifetime's worth of tests in school, and then to get into college you have to go and take a different, distinct test, the SAT, that is for a couple hours, and then that's the answer, and you don't really, why can't you statistically elevate the sum total of these tens of thousands of questions you've answered through and there are some basic statistical reasons why you can't. That was why it was a bad idea. But what we evolved it to, which was quite different, was realizing that No Child Left Behind, which was a big federal legislation that came through in 2001, had just created a lot of new funding for states to do testing, and a lot of new funding for districts to deal with the testing, and there were all these school districts awash in state test scores, and they weren't making any use of it. So we built tools to help the districts make better, and help teachers make use of it. So we did not to go into the detail, but we built analytic tools to analyze the results, and then we built this thing we called paper to web, which feels so anachronistic now, but back in 2001, there was a computer on every teacher's desktop, but not on every student's. Students didn't have computers, and they were $2,000 a pop in 2000. There were no iPads. So what the teachers would do is they would still give Scantron tests, which you probably remember, and many of you probably never had. Some of you do remember. So we did a much better, basically web-based SaaS platform that allowed you to give paper tests that you would photocopy and scan with a scanner and get the results back on the internet. So it was like this hilarious hybrid business where we were like sucking data from scan sheets into a cloud platform, and it was multi-tenant, and no one had any of these words at the time.
No. I was going to say that because.
And I became friends actually with the CTO of Salesforce.com,
Yeah.
who is a good friend of mine now still, because they were doing multi-tenant SaaS too.
Yeah.
And when we were started, we actually tried to recruit him and almost succeeded because Salesforce was so tiny and no one realized it was going to be worth $70 billion. And I assure you, EduSoft did not achieve that status. But so we were like two SaaS dudes in the Bay Area trying to figure it out. So I learned a lot about the tech structure, and I also learned a lot about probably the thing that gave me the most confidence to start Opower with the way we did was I learned a lot about selling into essentially government, and I wasn't afraid of it. And while in DC that is not as rare of a skill, in the Bay Area there are approximately 0 technologists who are comfortable selling into the government.
Right. No, it's it's really interesting how this paper to web scanning, and it's like it's funny.
With a trademark, TM, caps, paper to web.
Right. It's like it's kind of like America Online. Like we're putting you online, and the kids these days were like, what? And it's funny because like my daughter, she's like, Dad, what's a pen pal? Like, what is that? And it's like email, but you write it. She's like, oh, right? And it's funny how it's like paper to web.
Totally.
So, by the way, do you have a Twitter handle?
Yes.
You do? Okay, so.
At Dan J. Yates.
Dan J. Yates, okay.
I'm not a huge Twitter user.
No, it's fine. No, because you're probably going to say a lot of like golden like nuggets. Of wisdom. So just remember, if you guys are tweeting #StartUpGrind at Daniel J.
Or just
Yates.
Dan J.
Dan
Yates.
J. Yates. Okay. Okay. So let's get into the Opower story. That's why a lot of people are here. It's a huge success. By the way, you sold the EduSoft company for about $40 million, right?
Right.
In 2004. So you had that sort of success. Now you're going into your next idea, and so talk about that. Like, what was the aha moment for Opower? How did you come up with the idea? And actually, the other part was I never really heard the story of how you met your co-founder too. So let's talk about that.
Well, so I'll start. I'll actually take one step back. So, because I think a very important theme in my career, and so it's consequently in my life, is that I've been committed to launching and being involved with mission-driven businesses. So, and the way it came about that is I realized when that first 9-month gig I had, I realized how much opportunity cost there was to starting a company. I mean, from my perspective, I was tanking my 20s to start a business because you weren't partying, you were working on the weekends. And so for me, I concluded that to take that level, to make that level of commitment, I needed to believe in the outcome of what I was doing beyond just chasing the brass ring. Because I wanted to feel like even if we did this for 4 years and we didn't make a bunch of money, that I'd still feel good about how I'd spent my time. And so I first focused on education, and both my co-founder and I had a shared passion for that. Both of us had teachers as mothers and had ourselves just seen our own personal transformation in college and how much our education had changed us personally. And that's where my passion was at the time. And then when we sold EduSoft, it was a bunch of money, and I had like $4,000 in my bank account prior to that. And so all of a sudden there were all these zeros, paid off my credit card debt. It was more money than my family had ever seen. And so I was like, I'm going to take some time off. I'm going to take a wild trip. And I talked my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, to spend a year driving the Pan American Highway. So by one metric alone, it was a great trip. She stuck with me and we got married. Everybody said this is going to go one of two ways when you make this plan. So, but we had an amazing time, and we had there wasn't a mission on that trip. We were just the mission was south, which isn't a grand mission. But it turned me into an environmentalist. We listened to Jared Diamond's book Collapse on iPod, and I just felt like I was witnessing what he was narrating as we were driving. And so I came back with the commitment to focus on something environmental, and I was looking very broadly. I was even looking at nonprofit ideas. I was looking at clean tech. It was 2007, so it was this crazy, clean tech bubble in the Bay Area. That's where I was again. And so I started narrowing down. I had looked at advanced solar technologies and biofuels, and I realized that with my background, any of these companies, the beginning, the business guy, I wasn't going to be the tech guy, because these are like chemistry projects or optical engineering projects. I was going to be the business guy. The business guy for the first 3 years of an advanced solar startup is basically the masseuse for the scientist. And I don't want to be a masseuse. So, not that I have anything wrong against masseuses, but it wasn't for me. So I decided I wanted to apply my previous skills, what I learned in software, and looking to see, is there a tech company that I could just have more, could get started faster with lower like R&D lag, and so we started looking in energy at the side of the equation that I realized nobody was looking at. So the couple aha moments were, so that was sort of just exploration and self-discovery. It was kind of, I want to do something in the environment. It can't be deep solar tech. Okay, here's where I should be looking, but I hadn't have an idea yet. And then I started looking there, and the aha moments were, one, we downloaded, I started partnering with my co-founder, Alex Lasky, who was a friend of mine from college. And it just happened that he and I and our wives had all hit it off, and we were just seeing each other a lot. And he had been doing campaigns, political campaigns, and had just come off of a campaign and had some time. So having time is an essential element of being a co-founder. So he's also extraordinary, but in addition to having had free time. But so we started looking at things, and the first aha moment was we downloaded from the Energy Information Agency, which is currently being gutted by the Trump administration, a diagram that showed the flows of energy through the US. And on the left side was supply, and on the right side was demand. And it suddenly hit me, everyone in tech that I was talking to was on the left side. All of the focus was on turning coal to solar and, natural gas to wind. And no one was looking at reducing, if you cut the amount of the demand, that would be equivalent to the supply. And no one was talking. So we started thinking about demand side solutions. And then we just had some good luck. So I had a naive idea, which was I wanted to see how my energy use compared to an average of homes nearby. I thought that would be helpful, because I don't know anything about kilowatt hours or megadecatherms, and none of you do either. And that stuff's meaningless. Why can't you just tell me I'm using 30% more than people like me? And I had this idea. It wasn't really a business idea, though, but it seemed like, why isn't that information on the utility bill? And I was talking broadly about these ideas, and I had lunch with a woman at the Hewlett Foundation. It's a big foundation out west that funds a lot of environmental initiatives. And I'd mentioned this to her, sort of like gabbing. I mean, like this wasn't a business. It was just a thing that I'd gotten stuck in my head. And her eyes went wide, and she said, "Oh my God, we just funded this well-regarded behavioral psychologist who just did that exact study and proved that it reduces energy use by 6% in homes when they do this." So she went back to her office and had her assistant, I'm going to keep invoking like odd technical details to date myself, scanned to PDF the paper copy of the report that she had, and emailed, like, thank God she didn't fax it, but basically faxed it to me. And I read this report, and it was just amazing. It was like, wow, this guy has actually shown this sort of silly idea.
So it was an idea in the back of your head that was now validated through like a real researcher that you found through a network, the Hewlett Foundation.
That's right.
So I wanted to kind of slow that part down, because I felt because that was like a very defining moment for you, right? And I would almost like a milestone, because it's like there was an idea in the back of your head, then it gets validated, and then now you start going all in, right?
So that's actually a very important thing. I had in both of my companies, I defined this when I was starting EduSoft. It occurred to me we were like in week 10, and we were like deep in the salt mines of trying to come up with an idea, and we were pretty neither of us are depressives, but if we had been, we would have been depressed. I mean, it was like, what are we doing? We're 2.5 months in, we've done nothing. We're just sitting every day at this stupid table in your bedroom with a whiteboard, pretending to work and nothing. And so we had a couple ideas that were okay, and I hit on this paradigm that I think is very important for founding a company, which is hitting the go button. And it's very simple, but the notion is, at some point, you have to stop interrogating your idea and just start trying to make it work. And so we talked about which of these ideas are we going to hit the go button on, and that became like the dominant topic. I mean, it became a driving concept, and then we finally hit on this, which, as I described, was actually a very bad idea with EduSoft. But we just said this is we were deceiving ourselves. We thought it was good. We hit the go button, and then we didn't look back. And that is a critical. There's nothing real about it. It's real only in your head. You just make a switch. You're like, I'm not going to be 2 weeks later second guessing if we should keep doing. We're in, and we're going to be in. And in is like for years, and we're going to make this work. And so it's the same thing with Opower. We had this idea. The result, the data from the study suddenly made it seem like, wow, this is like it's bankable. Like it was not just a concept. It like demonstrated a change in the world. But then what we had to do is figure out how do you monetize that? How do you turn it into a business? And so then that's where my confidence from EduSoft around government funding came in, which we found this bucket of funding is energy efficiency funds that are run through utilities, and it's very baroque how this all works. But the point is, there's billions being spent to help people save energy, and we did the math and figured out that if the savings were even a third of what this professor had demonstrated, it would qualify as cost effective.
So I want to pause there because the thing is that the next step was to identify the pile of money somewhere, right? So either in the form of subsidies or whatever it may be, right? Because a lot of folks are like, I have this idea, I don't know how much it's worth.
Totally.
And like, oh, but I think it's a good idea. It's like, well, that's still not good enough, right?
Yes.
It's not bankable. So what's interesting,
Yes, it's great, Q. So another thing that and you actually used this word in a similar way or phrase earlier when we were talking. I've always talked about having a golden nugget to start a company. And to me, because when I talk to early entrepreneurs who are trying to decide to start a company or have started a company, the thing that always pains me the most is when somebody pitches me on something, but there's like 3 asterisks. It's like, okay, we're going to go to the customer, we're going to bring them this thing, and it's this widget, and if it was a little bit smaller than this, then it would fit in this thing, and then once they buy it, for some of them, they have this problem, and then they're going to use it for that problem, and then with that problem, some of them, get this result. And I'm like, okay, it doesn't fit. Most of them don't have the problem, and then you have it's unclear to me if any of them who have this problem actually get this result. Like, there's 3 asterisks. This is not a golden nugget, right? To me, a golden nugget is a thing that you can make. It sits here. You have the customer in mind. They have the money. They have a reason to buy, and then and there's just no asterisk.
So it's a product market fit, right?
Exactly.
And you did the rotation. We call it like a paying customer, right? Like there is an actual paying customer who bought your idea, right?
That's right. It doesn't have to be that you've actually done it and gotten the paying customer. But if you're starting the company, it takes a lot of work to go and get the paying customer. Mm-hmm. You've got to have figured this out before you can think this through.
Right.
So, like with Opower, it was okay. It turns out you can get people to reduce their consumption 3% when you send them a mailer that compares with their neighbors. Okay, that's not a business, so what is a business? Well, who's interested in that result? Okay, well there's this $1 billion bucket of money that's interested in that result, and they're willing to pay 5 cents a kilowatt hour. Well, we do the math, and a 3% reduction is actually 2 cents a kilowatt hour. Okay, so it qualifies. Are there any other exceptions to this thing? Well, it turns out actually they've never run a program that isn't for buying a hard piece of equipment, so we might not qualify. Mm-hmm. And then, can we do this? Yeah, it's easy. Where do we get the data? Okay, we can make the product, we have the buyer, we have the value proposition, and there were no exceptions. So then the first thing we did, though, to this point was the question marks we had were, will they actually buy it? Because it's not exactly like the other things they spend that money on. Mm-hmm. So before we built anything, my co-founder and I went out and sold a utility, and we had some very fancy mock-ups that would make you think we had built it. And we sold it, and then we calculated that we could build it in the time it took to sign a contract and the ink dry.
Let me just unpack that. Because when you say you sold it, so what does that mean? Again, in the B2B market, in the utilities, the most unsexy sector, how do you sell that? So tell us about that. You had to find somebody inside the utility who's like-minded, who understands, right?
This is where the unmatched genius of Alex comes in. He's the most remarkable networker and like early stage entrepreneurial salesmen I've ever met. So I have a tremendous unfair advantage here. But so it was like a whole series of serendipitous connections that in his enormous networking brain were not as serendipitous as they would have been to me. So we were driving to another meeting one day because we hadn't yet hit the go button on Opower. And we're talking to another group of guys, and he was like, "Hey, we're going to Palo Alto." He's like, "You know, I remember the city of Palo Alto's utility division is in downtown. Let's go stop by." We were a half an hour early for the meeting, which is probably the only time in either of our lives we've ever been early for anything. So of course we squandered the half an hour. We ended up being late for the meeting because we had a good conversation at the utility. But we walk in, and he just like smiles his way into the 6th floor, and we sit down with the director of marketing for the utility and talk to him about it. We didn't sell the city of Palo Alto for like 5 years, so the story doesn't end there. But then through that relationship, we got introduced to some people at Sacramento's utility, and we went over there and talked to them, and through there we bounced around and found this woman who was very entrepreneurial, unexpectedly at a utility, and she was sort of innovative, a maverick, and she was willing to give this a shot, and she helped us make the case internally. And then that's how we got.
I'm because again, this is the whole product market fit, trying to get the proof of concept, to scope it, and then after you prove it, then it's like, okay, let's go now put a lot more money inside. This is like, when we had the fishbowl, the portfolio, one of our portfolio, most of the companies were doing B2B marketing, right? And so we always say like, hey, try to get that proof of concept, because no company is going to put in like $2 million. They're going to do like a $50,000 like pilot. So you guys had a small pilot for how many homes? Like 300 homes?
This, I 100% agree with you. Normally when you're building, like a typical enterprise software solution will actually have like workflows the customer has to use and interfaces for the business, and then there's real question marks on whether or not anybody wants to use this, or an API, that may or may not be appealing, and and no one, you can't really tell when you're sitting in a room as a VC if the businesses are going to snap. In our case, it was actually we were very weird enterprise software business. So we had no interface to the utility. They wrote us a check and we downloaded their customers' billing data, and then we sent communications under their name to their customers. So it actually was, in a way, we had the behavioral science proof, and we knew we could produce these communications. We had nothing to validate with the utility as to whether or not they wanted, other than a negotiation of, does it qualify for their incentive structure, and will they take the risk? So we didn't have that product market fit back and forth with the customer for that reason, which is just an unusual thing about our business. And then the other thing is utility pilots are ridiculously large. So our first deal was $300,000, which should be your like 10th deal. But the flip side is there are a lot of startups who stagger on in a zombie state in the utility industry for many, many years because they stay alive on these catastrophically large pilots.
But wanted to add there though, but you had the Professor Robert Cialdini, his research was based on this. So that was actually a good
validation for us.
It was a good to show the utility company, hey, there's some research, there's some research in here. We should try this, right? And so $300,000, like, hey, okay, let's try that. It seems like it's pretty solid research, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, we did a bunch of things. We did a bunch of things right. We convinced him to join us, which gave us credibility. We did a lot of work. We did a lot of good prep work for our sales meetings. We seemed really polished and ahead of where we were. And then we connected all the dots. We had worked it all out, so it was a complete story.
So that was Sacramento, you said, the utility. So did they?
Let me give you one other thing, because I just remembered one of the things was most annoying. So it's often really hard when you're selling your first customers, especially in B2B, is that whoever's buying is often, the first buyer is often a maverick and often entrepreneurial, and so they have their own ideas, and they want you to do something else. Or in our case, they're trying to shoehorn you into some budget because they didn't have money allocated for this thing because it didn't exist before. And so they, well, can you just do this one other thing for us? Because then we can then I can tell my boss that it checks the box for this budget, and then we can do your thing, and I'm with you, but I need you to also do. And so for us, it was a carbon calculator, which you've probably been instructed to use in high school at some point to calculate your footprint, and that is the full use of the carbon calculator is for homework assignments. It's a useless tool that and at the time, all these utilities were fixated this was going to really change the way people understand energy. And we thought it was just malarkey.
But you took the money, right?
But we said, for $300,000,
it's a very expensive calculator, though,
we will build the calculator in 4 days,
Yeah.
in one dynamic HTML page, and then we will do our project. And she was like, let's go! And I was, it took me a long time to get there because I was so angry about carbon calculators. And so you gotta it's important to not be stupidly prideful about,
Bite your tongue sometimes, pick your battles.
I know I'm right, but I'm still right when you're paying me $300,000.
That's interesting though, it's that you still have to play the politics, right, in these big companies. And so in order for you to get this, you still have to play to their game. So then after you had Sacramento, did they up it? Meaning that before you got your second utility company?
As it turned out, the specifics in our business we sold, it was going to be a year later that they would expand, and we sold many utilities within the year.
That time?
Yeah, it started to take off. So the first phase for us was selling a bunch of these kind of pilots, but if you're selling $300,000 pilots, you sell 10 of them, and that's a great first year. And we sold 7, I think, in the first 8-9 months.
Same kind of thing, right? Like how you did it with the Sacramento.
Yeah, all over the country.
So I want to.
Then they started to come back, and we started to get third-party validation of the results, because every program was was basically structured like a clinical trial with a randomized control. So we could absolutely say with statistical rigor that we were actually reducing usage, and that was essential. So this is the kind of thing. This is the kind of thing that is in the golden nugget that is not obvious. So for our business, part of the golden nugget was that we could validate the results. Because if you could sell something that you think could save, but then you couldn't prove that it saved, then at the end of the year, who's going to renew? I don't know, maybe nobody. But in our case, that was a big debate. It's actually why our first pilot was $300K. We had to reach 30,000 homes to get a statistical validity that would demonstrate a result, and we were insistent about that. We're not going to come to work with you guys unless you're willing to do it big enough that we know we got a result. So those are on that we were totally unrelenting or unyielding, and on the other hand, on the carbon calculator, it's sure, let's build your carbon.
Did you build 7 other carbon calculators for these utilities?
That was what I was worried about. When does it end, Alex?
So this is great, because then as you got to your 7th customer, this is where the real money, MHS Capital was sort of your first investor, and then NEA, and then Excel, and then Kleiner.
That's right.
And these guys are huge, VCs, right? And so that's kind of the thing that you guys have to realize, when the Kleiner and Excel comes in, they're not gonna give you money to have them test and do your proof of concept on their money. They want you to have where you guys were, right? Where it's you have the product market fit, and it's now this wheel is turning real fast, and then now they just want to kind of pour their money on it.
Yeah, right? That's right. I think that's something that Adam Newman is struggling with at WeWork today, or we minus the work. What does that tell us? Yeah.
Who's we?
Yeah, sorry. Well, he is overrated. When you're starting, there's a very simple, you can get a very simple pattern in your mind with the stages of a company. There's this, the terms that are used, it's worth a little digression here, not digression, or explanation. There are terms used that I think are somewhat distracting. So there's milestones that are focused on pre-revenue. And then there's, people say, they're in scaling. But the things that really matter are product market fit, and then where you exit a product market fit with a defined market and a defined unit economic business model. So it's I know that this group of guys in sales can sell my product and it costs me this much per sale, and then I know I'm on average getting this much money for the sale, and then I know it costs me this much to deliver it, and that's profitable, and therefore, and it pays back within X months, and therefore I know if I pour more money into the engine, I can make it go faster because the market's there and the unit economics work. That's, most VCs are not interested in pouring in money until you can tell that story. And so
Is this the CAC ratio you're describing?
well, so that's part of it. It depends, so, there's CAC to LTV and these ratios that give you, but those are specifics around the like we never had a defined CAC ratio at Opower because none of our customers, or we had a CAC ratio, but it was irrelevant because it was like, it was essentially zero. Like our sales guy would sell a $100 million deal, and we didn't pay him $10 million for 8 years. So it was, and then on the other hand, we had no cancellations. We only had positive expansions. So it was very complicated for us to get those metrics. But what was clear was that a sales guy who cost $250 fully loaded was bringing in on average $1 million in recurring revenue. Okay, so that's a great metric. And then nobody seems to be canceling yet. Okay, I'm happy there. And then our cost to fulfill it was actually not software quality because we were just shipping a bunch of mailers because it was this, seemed to be the paper to mail guy, paper to web guy.
Paper to web.
But it was still 70% margins. Okay, so I've got 700K out of my million and I'm paying $250 to the sales guy. So I got $450 left to go to work. Okay, that's a pretty great model. And then how many utilities are there? Can you triple your sales force? Oh, you can? Okay, great. Here's a bunch of money. Triple your sales force. Go do that all fast. And so I say this because I'm giving this coaching a lot to the companies I'm involved with now. You want the ideal when you want to have a business actually where you put in money, you grow it, and then you actually get to a point where you could be cash flow break even, and that's when you raise again, because then then it's very clear to the VC, I'm actually just pouring in money to have you accelerate. I'm not pouring in money to keep you alive because we haven't figured it all out yet.
Right. They want to make sure you figured it out, and now we're just optimizing your operations, right?
That's right.
Right. Every dollar that we put in, we want to get high efficiency on that.
Right. Or I'm not even, maybe even better if you get even more efficiency, but your efficiency is fine, and you're just in inning one, and I want to get you to the 7th inning faster. That doesn't make any sense, but I want to accelerate you in time because what you're doing is valuable, and I will get a good return on investment with the existing thing. And so that's what, with my seed round, none of that was there. The guy was betting on me, and he was transparent about it, and it actually made me nervous because I was like, I want you to like me even if this doesn't work. This is about this idea. He's like, no, it's not about the idea, it's about you. And I was like, oh, don't sue. So that was the first investment, and that's typical. But then when we got the NEA dollars, we were, it was this hockey stick of growth with very limited expense, and we were actually we were debating if we needed to raise the money when we had gotten to cash flow break even on $1.5 million. And we weren't going to be able to grow very quickly, but that's such a position of power. So that's what we raised $1.5 million in August of 07, and then we raised 16 million basically 14 months later, and the first round was at 6 and the second round was at 60.
Right.
And the 10x.
Because you guys were growing so fast.
Well, we were growing fast and we were very capital efficient.
Yeah.
So like there was an auction between Excel and NEA and a couple others, and a big part of it was this like we came off very strong because like we didn't need the money.
Well, I mean, you guys are in energy and efficiency, right? So you got to be very efficient with your money. Right. So now I want to fast forward to the IPO because this is kind of like the sort of promised land for entrepreneurs, or that's what they see, right? This is the green pasture, like this is every entrepreneur's dream, is to take a company IPO. So tell us the realities. Was it really that? I mean, was it the land of milk and honey? Like as soon as she took your company IPO, or was it just kind of like another regular day, just a bigger round? How describe that, the whole process?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It's a hard thing to describe because it's like, it is a big, rare thing, right? And so there's something it's easy to lose sight of that once you've been through it that like, oh, I did this big rare thing that most people don't get to do, and that's we're humans. We compare each other, so it's just there's something in the rarity of it, right? When you take that aside, you just look at the specifics of the day. You know, it's a complicated, weird way of raising a round, right? And then creating
with a lot more people,
right? And creating hopefully liquidity, but that actually comes much more slowly and less than you would think. Like people's kind of, oh, once you're public, then you can sell, and actually, as any large shareholder, the rest of the world is watching, and so if you start selling, it has an impact on the stock price and on morale and whatever. So like no one can just dump their stock, or it's a very rare thing. You actually are, in many ways, more locked in than if you were in a private company. But the day itself, I mean, the event in its entirety is a cumbersome, complex way to raise money, and then to get. But then you enter this other era of your business. You now, you know, you're traded. The stock has a life of its own, which is mostly a negative because people watch it and get anxious when it, you know, overzealous and lose sight of the work when it's high, and depressed and lose sight of the work when it's low. So you know, that's not great. But I think, you know, the things that are positive in the micro, it's very fun. I mean, it's an exciting day. There's a lot of money being spent, and so the banks are very dedicated to making it a very exciting day for you. So they're flying you around in a private jet the week before, which is pretty exciting. You know, there's like a party that they have. They have like the exchange makes this like hand-painted commemorative thing for the company to commemorate the day, and they like. I mean, it's almost like the Beefeaters in England. No one was in that costume, but they might as well have been. And then you go down to the trading floor, which at this point is completely a Potemkin village. I mean, it is just a total sham. Like no one is actually trading on this trading floor, but they still have it there to make you feel like you can see the number, you know.
Right.
And
here's your wallet. I'll keep an eye on it.
All right, great. And it was very thrilling. And then the stock lists, and we had a successful IPO, so it's just a lot of celebration. And I'll never forget it. And then the other thing I did is a huge change that's positive, and I didn't appreciate this until a year or so after we were public, is just the discipline and the financial rigor that are required to successfully report each quarter as a public company. While expensive, we had probably $3 million a year in accounting expense just with the staff, and that we were not bloated. We were as lean as you could be. You really understand your business so much better when you're public. There's like no dark corners that you're not sure about anymore. The model is totally out there and exposed, and then you have to spend a lot of time with your CFO confronting those realities quarterly and deciding how to present them to the world.
Right.
And that's a whole kabuki theater that I didn't enjoy. There's a lot of time wasted presenting very little information to analysts and then trying to navigate knowing what they don't know and trying to, you know, keep your options open. But
Well, I was just saying, like that's actually one of the benefits for, you know, being a public traded company, because then everything is transparent, so to speak, right? And it's kind of funny when you saw WeWork, and they're like, "Hey, you're gonna have to open up the books," and they're like, "Oh crap," right? Like, and then they have to, you know, chop their valuation. I just kind of curious, like, I mean, you know, you're from the Valley. I'm gonna kind of go off script here, but like the Valley, like their valuation.
You promised me you would stay to only the questions. I'm very uncomfortable.
Acquisition by Oracle. Okay, so we'll get to that. But what's your opinion about that? I mean, Steve Case had talked about this, about, you know, when companies going IPO, there's so much overvalue and hype that's happening in the Valley that now when companies go IPO, they're actually going to have to do a down round, and that's kind of like what you're seeing now with like the WeWork.
I mean, I guess the Valley is definitely the center of this, but there's just a private equity bubble. You know, so there's been a lot of overinvestment in private equity. It's showing up in not just in Silicon Valley. It's showing up in, you know, LBO shops overpaying. I'm not going to speculate on which ones I think are the most overly aggressive, but there's been some there's too many of the recent heroes of private equity have been remarkably aggressive characters, which to me is indicative of the overinvestment that's going on, and nobody can lose. The guys who can't lose in business where private equity is a business where you constantly should be losing. So it's just you're making big bets and only a few of them are winning. So yeah, there's just a big bubble, and so there's this impedance mismatch because while the public markets are definitely also not in a negative spot, they're not as frothy as the private equity markets have been. So yeah, I mean, I've been talking with a buddy of mine who's a big hedge fund guy, and he and I've been debating, is WeWork going to be like where the worm turns, because it's really shining a light on to many more people on how pervasive and dramatic the overhyping has been. But we'll see.
Okay, so I'm gonna I have a few more questions because I need some time for Q&A because I'm sure some folks have some questions. But let's go really quickly. I mean, with Opower, then you got acquired by Oracle. Now it's Oracle Utilities. Now that's they've kind of made that even bigger, right? So, so let's just go unless you want to talk about anything there.
No.
I wanted to talk about the Dandelion Geothermal. Let's get some time there. So now you're on your third or fourth startup now?
Let's go with third.
Third, okay. So before I even go to this geothermal, story, you talked about there was an IPO party you had with Opower. Can we get invited to your IPO party for Dandelion?
Just keep in touch.
Just keep in touch. Okay. So I got you on tape.
No promises.
All right. So he said he's going to invite us to his IPO party. Okay. So let's talk about Dandelion. So talk about that. I think. Again, like these guys were like really interested to know more about like, hey, taking some of the what we have in the earth instead of trying to generate the.
I'll start with it. So this is a company I'm really excited about. So I got introduced to this company just about 2 years ago. Kathy and James, the two co-founders, had spun it out of GoogleX. And at GoogleX, they have a mandate to only look at opportunities that can be addressed through technology innovation and that have a market size of over $100 billion. So gargantuan opportunities. And that's the thing about this company. I've never been involved with something that I feel like has so much upside potential. And what they were looking at, and then what we're doing now, the best way to understand it is we're all very familiar with the transition that's afoot in automobiles, but moving from the combustion engine to the electric motor. But there's a same sized and equally important transition that is just beginning to happen, transitioning from the combustion furnace to the electric motor of furnaces, the electric furnace. And for every $1.25 an American driver spends on gasoline, they spend $1 to heat their home. So it's the same size problem. It's the same amount of carbon emissions. It's in our initial target market in New York, where we're only targeting fuel oil customers. How many of you live in a house that burns fuel oil? We got one. Used to. Okay, so been around it, 90% of us don't, right? So this is not the dominant fuel source in New York or anywhere, but there are still 2 million homes in New York that have fuel oil, and if we just are selling to them, we have a $60 billion sales opportunity for this company just to New York fuel oil. So it's like, I've never built, market size is normally something you worry about with a startup, but I do not worry about it. I worry about competition, I worry about getting it right, I worry about gross margin. But so then what we do, and why do we have the best electric option for the furnace, is that we use the fact that the earth beneath your house is a constant temperature year-round, to use it as a source to suck heat out of in the winter and to pump heat into in the summer. And then the way we do that is with a heat pump, which is basically another word for the same technology that you see in your air conditioner or your refrigerator, except we can run it both ways. So the refrigerator is pumping heat out of the fridge, and we are pumping, in the summer, we pump heat out of the house, but we can run it in reverse, and so we can pump heat into the house. And then as a result of using the earth under the way we use the earth under your feet is we drill a 500-foot deep hole, and we bury a pipe in the shape of a loop, and we fill it with water. It's a little bit different than water, but it's basically water. And that water stays earth temperature, and then we can cycle that water into the house and use it to draw heat from that water and to pump heat back into the water. And so it becomes more than twice as efficient as a normal air conditioner, and it's 4 times as efficient as baseboard radiators. So with that, that's the business, right? That's the tech. We sell it to homes at around $30,000 to $40,000, which seems crazy. But with the investment tax credit available today and subsidies at the state level, customers end up paying around $20K. Now $20K still seems like a lot, but the typical homeowner who's running heating oil, and you may be doing this today, is paying like $3,000+ a year for oil to heat their house. And in New York, it's much higher than here because it's colder winters. And so they save about $2,500 a year. So if they're looking to replace their heater or their furnace, and this is a $10,000 extra price, it's paid off in 4 years. And then the next 15 years, they're in the money. So people are jumping over this. We have a 6-month backlog now in installations. We started selling last August, and this last quarter, so not even a year into selling, this last quarter we sold over $7 million worth of systems in the quarter. So it's taking off. It's very exciting.
All right, I'm gonna have to pause you there. Are you guys looking for people to hire? And how does your stock option package look like? It's a whole bunch of people here. And you think this is going to be a bigger opportunity than Opower?
I think the upside on this is definitely bigger.
Because this market's huge. How big is it? 200 billion?
It's a $200 billion market.
200 billion. So, and how big was Opower?
Opower was, we went public, we were $1 billion, and we had 100, Opower now has probably 200 million in revenue. Okay. This company could be, so our 5-year plan is to get to 500 million in revenue in 5 years.
So what are you looking for?
Seriously. We're based in New York. If you're willing to move to New York, we're looking for
actually, you know what, hold on. It's New York now, okay.
We're looking for finance and engineering and sales and installation.
You have a total of 6.5 million, so it's really, really early, right? Like you've raised a total funding of 6.5.
We've raised 23 million.
Oh, 23 million. Okay, now you got
Yeah, we're not that early, but we're still early. They exited with a couple $1 million from Google, and then they raised another 5 in a seed that lasted us through last year, and then we closed 16 million this February.
Okay. So yeah, keep an eye on that company.
It's a very cool company, and I'm hopeful we can do really big things. And I didn't get to. I talked a bunch about the cool tech is the drilling and the heat pumps, and we actually have a bunch of patents on the drills and on the ancillary equipment. And it's like the basic technology is that we're migrating a bunch of innovations that have been made in oil and gas and miniaturizing them for suburbia. And I can assure you, no other company on earth is trying to bring oil and gas drilling into the suburbs. So we have a pretty open innovation landscape.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's not super deep science where we have like an 8-year cycle on the research. You were like, well, that coiled tubing unit thing that's a 60-foot diameter unit on the oil rig, that's amazing. Can we make a 6-foot diameter one?
Right.
And then the answer is often yes, and then we make it, and then it helps us.
Okay, cool. We'll definitely keep an eye on that. I wanted to cover just one more topic here before. I think I may only have one. We can fit in one question and you answer that.
One quick question.
One
yes or no answer.
Yeah. No. So there's a lot of startups here, and they know that you do a lot of angel investing. Maybe not so much now, but they know that you're an angel investor. So kind of tell us, what do you look in for a company? Yes, you had told me in the back that you would usually invest into companies that go through, if your buddy says, hey, invest in this company, then you kind of obliged. So kind of tell us, how do we get Dan Yates to invest in our startup? What are sort of the things that you look at where you're looking at yourself man, I got to be stupid not to invest in this company? Kind of give us that little perspective.
Yeah, so just to make sure everybody knows, I am not a formal active angel investor who has a certain number of hours dedicated a month to receiving people and reviewing decks, and I don't have any staff working for me on it. So it's a thing I do as sort of as collateral damage to my position in the world and the people I know. So to that end, and my bias in terms of my history of investing is definitely heavily biased towards my own network, but that has actually also been sort of a safety mechanism for me, because when I think about investing in early stage, really the answer depends on the stage. So like I'll give you, I've invested in a few companies that are at later stage, like Grove Collaborative I just put in a bunch of money into, but at a $150 million valuation.
Okay.
It just raised at 800, so at least in the private equity bubble universe, I'm already a big winner.
Right.
We'll see what happens when it comes back to reality. But I invested in that because I was able to get a handle on the model and look at the unit economics and see the recent historical growth. And so the growth rate gave me confidence in the market size.
Are you interested?
And Grove Collaborative is, who knows, has anybody used Grove Collaborative? So I didn't mean, so this is, let me be quick on this. I didn't mean to spend a bunch of time on this, but Grove Collaborative is, the way I think about it, they would cringe, is basically the Whole Foods cleaning products aisle on the internet. Okay. So why is that a company? Because if you live in Fort Wayne, Indiana, where my cousins live, there is no Whole Foods, and you decide that you want to get into organic and healthy cleaning products, and you don't have any of them in your neighborhood, in your community supermarket, and you don't know what they are.
Yeah.
So you go to Amazon and there's like a bajillion cleaning products. So they've curated it and they've organized it, and so it's just exploded. They went from 20 million in sales to 118 million from one year to the next, and like keeps growing. So what makes me invest in a company at that stage? It's sort of radical growth with a clear unit economic model that has been validated, so I know that my money's being pumped in, and then somebody validating the founder. When I look at, I am not actually a big pre-revenue and as I knock that term, pre-product market fit investor, because there are just so many things to unpack. And I think good angel investors at that stage, they just have they're just a different personality. They're comfortable placing 100 bets and watching 97 of them fail. And I'm not prolific enough to place 100 bets. I don't place enough, and then I don't like all the failure.
Right.
But that is what you kind of need. And so at that stage, I mostly limit my investments to people I really trust and know, who I am betting on the founder, like MHS Capital did to me. So, and then in between, there's this big gray area, but earlier companies that are not as growing as insanely fast, but have some clear visibility to the unit economic model. I mean, those are the things I always come back to, right? It's like, I want to understand the business model, I want to understand the quality of the team, and I want to understand the market size. And those are it's like, the market size is sort of the size of the ocean you're in, the team is like the quality of, the sailors, and then the unit economic model is some combination of like the ship you built and the path you've already plotted out. And if those things are there, then I believe you can get to the promised land. But that's what I look at.
So unfortunately, we don't have time for Q&A, so we have one last question. We always try to keep this down at 1 hour.
Okay.
Just because of the video. Because otherwise, after 1 hour, people are just like, they just stop it. So one last question, actually two. So if you could turn back time, say 20 years ago, so fresh out of college, like what would be the single best piece of advice you would have given yourself?
That one I have a clear answer for. I would have pushed myself to get mentors.
Okay.
I spent too long just kind of thinking like I can just do this, figure it out myself. And it would have been worth the time to find some great mentors. And then to be willing to admit that the mentor I had, I might outgrow them and then move on to a new mentor or what have you, because certainly early on I wouldn't have had the access to the mentors I have now, but I would have prioritized that.
Where's a good place to find mentors? I know you discovered them much later, but like where would be a good place to find them?
I don't know. I have a great answer for that, actually.
Not in the library or coffee shop?
No, library. I mean, the answer just has to be in the course of what you're doing, your business and your networking. You find somebody who's impressive, who's talking at a, at a startup grind event with a microphone.
Wink, wink. Okay.
Yeah, and just accost them and ask them. I mean, that would be the most sort of extreme version. But I actually wouldn't recommend that. You want to talk. It needs to be somebody who you can see a lot.
Okay.
It shouldn't be from a distance. It's not an idle thing. It's like really somebody who can coach you.
Like people that could be great advisors.
So for me, my best mentor was the VC that invested in me at NEA, Harry Weller, who unfortunately passed away.
Yeah,
years ago.
exactly.
But he was just he was a big factor in my life. And that's the one thing I realized, like a great mentor can be kind of like a big brother also.
Yeah.
And you realize there's sort of it's helpful to have a business brother who you can, or uncle, who you can go to when the shit's hit the fan.
Yeah.
And you don't want to have any pretense. You just can lay it all out and get their advice. That's stuff that I missed earlier.
So one last question. We asked all of our speakers this question. It's kind of funny because when I sent it to him, he's like, actually, that's kind of like, I don't want to answer that question. I was like, that's the most important question that we always ask. So we always ask this question.
I'm ready now.
Okay. Who's your favorite superhero? Slash historical figure, and why?
Yeah, so I struggle with this because there's like a million people that I could mention for different reasons, and nobody stood out to me as encapsulating all of the things I would want in a person or to just characterize in myself. So I'll just pick one, which I've always been fascinated with the mathematician Euler, because he was insanely prolific for decades. Mm-hmm. He advanced the field of number theory significantly. He was the guy who came up with what many argue is the most beautiful equation ever e to the I pi equals -1. He created the field of complex analysis, and he did it in the Renaissance, when he was doing it with candlelight and a quill,
right.
And he wasn't searching the internet for hints. He wasn't really collaborating with that many people, and I just it just marvel at what a magical mind he had, and what a different world that he lived in than any of us did, and I like picturing that.
Says the computer science major from Harvard. Well, thank you very much for coming out, ladies and gentlemen.